to get out of the crisis that they found themselves in the end of the 70s. In the end of the 70s also there was big labor militancy just after the fall of the dictatorship. So that was a good deal to be able to save the system. And then there was a social alliance that was created with some middle class categories in the population that would get some, that would also get some privileges, like landowners would get agricultural subsidies of the EU. University professors, they would get some research funding. So there was a social alliance between the upper class and big parts of the middle classes, but also a part of the workers' aristocracy, what can be called workers' aristocracy, like, for instance, people working for a public electricity company or telecommunications company. A lot of them would have, let's say, decent enough salaries. So that was a bit the social compromise that was constructed in the, starting from the 80s and then going forward in the 90s, and a big part of the 2000s where actually the growth rate was quite high due to mainly due to increase in the tourist sector, finance, and the services sector in general. So, so if we take the sectors that they were favored by the single market and the sectors that were severely hit. In the latter, we have manufacturing and energy, and then agriculture that were severely hit. Then we had transport and construction increasing a lot. There was really a construction boom, which was among the sectors that I mentioned before. It was really the machine of the economy in the 90s and in the 2000s, and trade and finance increased, and tourism also increased during this period. So, but as you imagine, when agriculture and manufacturing is going down, the trade deficits are growing. So that was a trend that started with the entry in the single market, but after the entry in the euro, when the last instrument of the state to do competitive devaluation and to adapt a bit in the international situation was lost, then the trade deficit really really exploded. Well, I had a graph that showed really how the increase of trade deficit is sharp. I will not risk showing it. I can risk, okay. So this is the red line is the red line is the deficit with the extra EU countries, and the blue line is the deficit with countries within the EU. And it's after the euro, after the entry of the euro, you see the years, and it's you can see that it's going sharply down. So down, it means that the deficit increases. So that was the trend, and this was what actually alimented the public debt, because these trade deficits, through various ways, such as reduction of corporate taxes, bailouts, these deficits became public debt. So in a way, if these trade deficits, they cannot be associated with low labor productivity, both because labor productivity up to the 2000s, labor productivity in Greece was above the EU average.
The growth. The growth of productivity.
Yeah, the growth of productivity. So the increase of the trade deficit was inherent in the way, in the mode of development that has been chosen by the EU and by the Greek government as a development model. The model based on this logistical hub idea, on this services only economy. It was mathematically that it was going to produce trade deficit. The most simple example is agriculture. If you are a country that exports massively food and then suddenly it starts importing a bigger and bigger part of its needs, that of course it contributes to a trade deficit. And maybe, you know, this problem wouldn't have occurred if the banking crisis hadn't occurred in 2007, starting from the US, if the banks hadn't stopped lending to each other, then probably the cost of credit, the provision of cheap credit would continue for Greece as well as for the other countries. So actually the problem could have remained covered up, the structural problem of their economies for a longer time. But from the moment that this bank crisis erupted, the cost of credit rose steeply, and so the crisis came about. So Dimitri after me will analyze the consequences of the policies that were followed by the Troika in the last 4 years, but it's for sure, what is clear already is that this model completely fails to produce growth. And actually it doesn't want to produce growth. Even if they say so in a slightly apologetic tone, we would say that because they say, okay, growth is coming soon, but that's not really the objective of their policy. And the objective of the policy, it's not either to reduce debt, because this is the more mediatized objective of this whole program that is followed in the last 4 years, that this is to reduce debt. Actually, the priority, the absolute priority, is reduce labor cost. It is written in the text of the memorandum, it is written that reducing labor cost is one of the priorities, but in reality it is the most important priority, and this actually has worked. This has worked in Greece in the last 4 years. Salaries have been cut more than 30%. Dimitri will talk more about that. And the way that the general paradigm is changing is to invest even more, try to grow even more the part of tourism in the GDP, try to give some more weight to extractive industries, like the gold mining in northern Greece, and they also have a direction of investing in some labor-intensive manufacturing that could lead to some exports. So trade deficit will continue. Actually, things that are needed by the population in the country will continue to be imported, but we hope that some other things will get exported, but the chances of this improving the trade deficit are very, very weak. So actually, Greece, the reforms that happened in Greece in the last 4 years are less of an economic paradigm to follow, and they're more of a political project. And it comes down to what Kes was explaining in his presentation. It's to set an example of a successful war against labor, of how you can radically reduce labor cost, how you can change the institutional power that the inferior classes had won within a society over the years. So, and this is only a part of the strategy of the European economic elites to get out of the crisis. So reducing labor cost is one part of the strategy. The second thing is commercialize more and more spheres of life in order to be able to extract profit from them. And the third part is to, through investment protection and international investment protection treaties, to reduce much more the barriers that prevent you from exploiting people in other countries too, all over the world. So basically it's a political project, and I think it is expressed very well by a report that was issued by JP Morgan in 2013, which was actually saying that the economic crisis in Southern Europe showed that it was not only an economic problem or mainly an economic problem, but it was a political problem. And they said, I also had it in a slide, but maybe it's better if I read it because I'm also running out of time. So actually, the credo was that the political systems in the periphery were established in the aftermath of dictatorship, and